I'm John Duval. Welcome to the Scriptural Way Bible Study. The Scriptural Way Bible Study is brought to you by the Seminole Point Church of Christ, located at 16300 North May Avenue, Oklahoma City. On behalf of the elders and members of the Seminole Point Church of Christ, I would like to thank you for your interest in spiritual matters. Now, let's take our Bibles and seek the Scriptural way.
And I'm John Hall.
And this is the Scriptural Way broadcast. We'd like to thank you for joining us this evening for this time period of studying the Word of God. Gentlemen, how are y'all doing this evening?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you doing?
I'm getting a little bit closer to you, I think.
That's outstanding. You're close to wonderful.
That's right. John, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Good.
You're
good.
next to wonderful.
Probably a little farther away than that.
We hope that you are having a very good day, and we again thank you for joining us for this study. Before we begin with our study this evening, we want to share with you some information regarding Lansing Robertson. If you've been following this broadcast for a while, you have seen Lansing fill in from time to time in some months past. And this past Sunday morning, he had to be taken to the emergency room and was put in ICU due to some medical difficulties he had. Lansing has been fighting cancer and been undergoing treatment for that. And he's still in critical condition, Dale, but there is some measure of improvements, hasn't there been?
Oh, that is correct. I mean, Mercy Hospital does an outstanding job. They immediately put him on an antibiotic and they put him on an antifungal to treat for infections that they didn't know what might be there.
Right.
They do suspect that he has an infection, but and in fact, so much so that his kidneys had shut down. But his kidneys are starting to produce some urine now, and that's a very positive thing. He does have some left ventricular hypertrophy of the heart, which is a thickening of the heart wall, which may explain why his blood pressure has been as low, because when you have that thickening, it's not going to spit out blood like it normally would, the left ventricle, which it has to do that. And but his blood pressure has come up. This evening it was 136 over 56, and that's the highest it's been in quite some time. He's also breathing a whole lot easier this evening than he has been, and he's making such positive progress that the hospital is now talking about the fact that if he continues to progress the way he is, that they'll be moving him into another room out of ICU. So hopefully within the next couple of days that will happen, and he will be able to communicate with folks visiting him. Right now he's pretty much in a resting state. Even last night he didn't even recognize some folks when they came in. But today he seems to be pretty cognizant today. So things are looking better. We just ask you to continue to pray for him.
Yes, please do so. It sounds like prayers are being heard.
Absolutely.
And answered, and so we continue to pray for him. And for those who aren't on Facebook, I want to express to you the family's appreciation for your prayers and kind thoughts. I was talking to Ms. Retha earlier today about that, and she asked me to relay that to everybody. They do greatly appreciate all of your thoughts and prayers regarding Lansing's well-being. Well, let's go ahead and step into our study. We're going to begin a look at the subject, overall subject of evolution. And the fundamental question that I'm going to have as we go through these lessons is this: can a Christian who says that he believes the Bible at the same time acknowledge a belief in the theory of evolution and the theories regarding how life began? It isn't the purpose of the study to try to convince someone who is entrenched in evolutionary theory. It's not the purpose of the study to try to convince them to come out of it. That would take a much deeper study, and much of the material would be outside of the Bible. But what we're talking about with these studies is simply what the Bible says regarding this very important subject, and how that here is an individual, a Christian, someone who says he believes in Jesus Christ as the Son of God, someone who has placed his faith upon the Word of God, and his faith is established in the Word. Can that individual say, well, I believe the Bible, but I think life began this way, and I think life evolved this way. So that's what we're going to be looking at in this study. The first lesson we're going to begin with, and this is a two-part study. There are some forerunner studies to this available on the church's website under the sermon section. We talked about why, talked about God, and then we had one lesson on why a Christian should believe the Old Testament and why a Christian should believe the New Testament. And those are kind of preliminary studies to this. But tonight, we're going to be talking about the subject of life and how did it begin. You know, Dale, when you talk to people who believe in evolution, one of the things they don't talk about very much is the origin of life. You know, they have the idea of the development of life. They've got that pretty well down pat in their mind. But they acknowledge that the beginning of the origin of life here on this earth is truly an unanswered question. And what I'd like to do, we've got 7 different possibilities that the world has thrown out there. And we're going to just take a few minutes to walk through these so you can kind of see what some people say is the explanation as to the origin of life on this earth. And you'll see these up on the charts on your screen there as we go through these. But Dale, what is one of the first theories regarding the origin of life?
Well, I might mention that some of these theories are just way out there. But the theory that a lot of us hear about is the electric spark. This is where scientists say that there was an electric spark that can generate amino acids and sugars, and from an atmosphere loaded with water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen. And scientists now suggest that the early atmosphere of the Earth was actually hydrogen poor. So obviously this theory has been blown away. Evolutionists believe in a very old Earth. It is the early atmosphere of a very old Earth to which the former reference refers.
Yeah.
So we know that the Earth was not created, nor was life created by an electric spark. So that brought about another theory.
It did. John, what would be another one?
Well, another one here would be clay community, which is an interesting
I thought that was
title
interesting.
there.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that one myself, but apparently chemist Alexander Graham Cairns-Smith suggests that mineral crystals in clay could have arranged organic molecules into organized patterns. After a while, probably a long while, I would assume,
That would be my thoughts.
organic molecules took over this job and organized themselves. They formed a labor union, I guess, and they got organized.
Well, it's hard
Brain
enough.
power.
It's hard enough to get kids to do work around the house. So can you imagine, organic molecules there trying to get them to work? Another theory has to do with the deep sea vents. And when you look at, sometimes you'll see on the Discovery Channel or maybe the History Channel, more like the Discovery Channel, they may have episodes about these deep sea vents. What's interesting is the deep sea vents are pretty impressive when you look at the temperature of the gases that are coming up on the bottom of the ocean floor, and there is life living down there. It's pretty interesting. But they say in this deep sea vent theory, they suggest that life may have begun at submarine hydrothermal vents, where they were spewing key hydrogen-rich molecules. They say that their rocky nooks could have allowed the concentration of these molecules to come together and provide some type of mineral catalyst for critical reactions there. So it's just another theory. And we've got a few more to share, only because they're interesting, I think, but they're theories. But people, now just as much, guys, as we believe in the Bible, these people believe in these theories with
Absolutely.
the same fervor. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let's look at the fourth one.
Yeah, I was going to mention, one of the interesting ones that I think is very stupid, quite honestly, is the chili start. Now, this is not food. This is actually ice,
As bad as I thought that too, Dale.
Yeah, I know. According to this theory, though, ice may have covered the ocean for 3 billion years or more, and as the sun was about a third less luminous than it is now, this layer of ice, possibly hundreds of feet thick, might have protected fragile organic compounds in the water below from ultraviolet light and destruction from cosmic impacts. Now, here's the really curious thing about this theory, is the cold might have also helped these molecules to survive longer. That would suggest the molecules had life. Where were they created?
Oh, there you go.
I don't understand this, allowing key reactions to happen. So now we've got molecules that already had life, and they had this reaction and they created more life.
Yeah. It's kind of like a computer. If you don't have the electricity on the computer, it's just a conglomeration of parts, and someone has to put the electrical spark through there to activate it. How did this happen?
Well, David just kind of reiterated what Dale was saying there. He just said, just wondering who created all this stuff that we're talking about here, from which life allegedly sprang, which is basically what Dale was saying there. And Anthony mentions this, and I often think about this when we talk about evolution. The funny thing about atheistic evolution is that it requires a bigger leap of faith. Something came from nothing than Christianity does.
Oh, that's right.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, a little bit later, it's in the second lesson, we're going to look at different theories regarding how life began, separate and apart from a scientific theory. And he's right. It takes more faith to believe this than what we're talking about.
And that's truly blind faith.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
There's no evidence to support that. Now, if you like the other ones, listen to this one for a moment.
RNA.
Yeah, RNA.
Which hopefully somebody knows a little bit about.
Yeah, that's the
Precursor.
Republican National Association.
It's
Ribonucleic acid.
Yeah.
It's simpler form of DNA.
Right.
Similar to, I've got a misspelling there, so.
Where's that?
It's similar to DNA, or simpler to DNA.
Yeah,
Simpler to DNA.
Yeah.
Simpler than DNA, right?
Yeah.
Helps to create DNA and proteins. Some people theorize that RNA helped to create the first DNA.
Okay.
And of course, we're getting right back to David's question, who created the RNA, which is what you have here at the end.
Right.
Later, DNA and proteins succeeded this RNA world because they are more efficient. The question still remains how RNA got here in the first place. And while some scientists think the molecule could have spontaneously arisen on Earth, others say that that was very unlikely to have happened.
Yeah. So there's even disagreement there in the scientific fields about that. Yeah. Well, let's consider the sixth one. Some call this a simple start. And this goes like this. Instead of developing from complex molecules such as RNA, they say that life might have begun with smaller molecules interacting with each other in cycles of reactions. I remember when I was in junior high, one specific science class that I had, the science book said that there was this primordial type ooze, and there was electricity, lightning bolt, or something other, and anyway, this one single cell began to exist. And then it got cross with itself and divided. And then it divided again, and that's kind of what they're talking about here.
That's because two rocks were rubbing together, and they irritate each other, and so it split. That cell split.
Okay. Dale, why don't you share with us the last one?
Oh, the panspermia?
Panspermia.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
According to this theory, life did not begin on Earth at all. Instead, some believe life was brought here from elsewhere in space. There was this spaceship that came down.
Meteorite.
Oh, was it a meteorite?
Some say spaceship. This theory holds meteorite.
I think it was probably a spaceship with little green men. However, even if this concept were true, the question of how life began on Earth would then only change to how life began elsewhere. How did those little green men begin to exist?
How did the microbes that hitched the ride on the meteorite, where did they begin? And listen, we're not doing this to try to make fun of these, because understand, people genuinely believe these. But we wanted to share with you the varying views out there. And not one of these views has any substantial evidence whatsoever. They're just theories based upon scientific guesses. And that's all they are. If we were to narrow down, John, to where, essentially, make it real simple, where did life come from? There are only two possible choices. And the first choice, and you may have heard this in your science classes before, is called abiogenesis. What is abiogenesis, John?
Well, abiogenesis is the supposed spontaneous origination of living organisms directly from lifeless matter.
That's the basic thought.
Life from lifelessness.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, thing is, this has already been believed before. If you go back, and you'll have this there in the outline that you've downloaded there, but you go back during the 4th century BC, people who are living in Egypt, whenever the Nile River would flood the banks there of the river there, it would leave behind a very nutrient-rich mud that enabled people to grow their crops. But it also brought about many frogs. And so people would observe that, When it flooded, here comes the mud, and then next thing you know, here comes frogs. So frogs spontaneously comes from the mud. You know, and even in our history, you go back, I don't remember the exact number of years, you know, 200, maybe 300 years. You know, if you this is prior to Louis Pasteur, if you were to leave some rotting meat out open, leave it out for a couple of days, it would produce flies and maggots. And so the theory was, and the observation was, put it there, walk away, next thing you know, flies, maggots, rotting meat produces flies and maggots. But Louis Pasteur is one that did some experimentation and said, no, it doesn't work that way. He put one into a sealed container, one to an open container, and the meat that was in the sealed container, nothing ever happened to. No flies, no maggots, nothing. And so he concluded that the maggots that came forth in the meat actually came from a fly that buzzed in and landed on the meat. I mean, but the point is, though, is our science has thrown that belief out the window. They have disproven abiogenesis time and time and time again. But yet, in order to support the theory of how life began on this earth, fundamentally, they believe that life came from lifelessness. And that's abiogenesis. So, all right, Dale, tell us about biogenesis.
Well, this is pre-existing life. It means the development of life from pre-existing life. This option says that only life can produce life, and all living organisms, including all plant life and all animal life, require something living in order to live.
That's right.
For example, a plant will not grow without a seed which comes from a pre-existing plant.
Right.
A chicken will not hatch out of an egg unless some pre-existing chicken lays the egg. Thus comes the question, which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Chicken.
You know? A person cannot obtain life without pre-existing person to give birth.
It's a simple concept.
It is.
Something we were always taught in school.
And so I have to take issue with what you said earlier. I am mocking all of this. I am making fun of this because it's ridiculous.
And they would say the same thing about us, Dale. That's quite all right.
Probably so.
Yeah.
Well,
John.
David did want to stress the fact that he agreed with the simple start solution. In the beginning, God created. How simple is that?
That's
right.
very simple, David. I agree with you.
That's right. Well, I just realized that we've flown past our first break, so we'll go ahead and pause and take our first break. On the other side of that, do we have any more thoughts in the chat room to bring out?
One from Rhonda.
Okay, we'll do that. And before we move on this particular section, on the other side of the break, we're going to make a point that every Christian who wants to believe in evolution and how they say life began, it's a consequence of that and something that you must be willing to admit. So we'll talk about that on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. We will be right back.
Hello, I'm Ron Witt, one of the elders of the Seminole Point Church of Christ. On behalf of the elders and members of the Seminole Point Church of Christ, I would like to invite you to be our guest at any of our worship services and Bible classes. The meeting place of the Seminole Point Church of Christ is located at 16300 North May Avenue, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, zip code 73013. The Seminole Point Church of Christ meets Sunday mornings at 9:30 for Bible classes, 10:30 for worship service, and 5 p.m. for our afternoon worship service. We also have Bible classes on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. In addition to our regularly scheduled Bible classes and worship services, we also have a Bible class on Tuesday morning at 10, this live netcast at 7:30 p.m., and a ladies' Bible class which meets once a month. Whether you live in Oklahoma City area or you are traveling through Oklahoma City, we would love to have you come and be our guest. We have Bible classes for all ages. Now, let us return to our study.
We're back. Okay.
Well, Rhonda mentioned in the chat room that they're saying that one of the missions of the space shuttle is to place telescopes so they may know or they may see how life began.
Sure.
Just wish they would save Americans some money, millions and millions of dollars, I would say, and read Genesis 1 and 2.
Yeah, but then we wouldn't have the pretty pictures.
Well, yeah, we do get good pretty pictures, yeah.
But that's a very good point. Matter of fact, I've known some people before. I knew a band director one time. He felt like space travel was the biggest waste of money that he'd ever seen. So
we could save a lot of money.
Exactly.
Cut that deficit down.
They'll spend it elsewhere.
Well, don't go there. You know, we could save a lot of money if we just got rid of our federal government. So let's just keep it simple.
Okay, there you have it. Our federal government is equal to.
I guess I need to be looking for a new job.
Okay. Well, but let's think about something here for just a moment, though. Most people will admit that all 7 possibilities are nothing more than theories. We have to recognize that of the 7 possibilities, they're theories. They're not based in fact. They're not even based in scientific fact. They are all theories, conjectures, and speculations. Man will never be able to prove these theories to be fact. So whenever an individual is going to accept one of these beliefs, he must use the phrase, I believe. For instance, I believe in the theory of the electric spark beginning life on earth. He must be willing to say, I believe in the theory of the clay community causing life to begin. He must be willing to say, I believe in the theory that life began at the deep sea vents. I believe in the theory that life began in the ocean underneath the frozen surface there. I believe in the theory that RNA resulted in the development of DNA. I believe in the theory that life had a simple start all by itself. And I believe in the theory that life came to this earth on the back of a meteorite. Now, my point is this. Although it's within the discussion of science, it is still an I believe. It is not a fact. But now here's a point we need to focus on. If a person is willing to say, I believe in the theories of man, then he must be willing to say, and get this, all Christians who say they believe in evolution, think about this. If I say that I believe in the theories of man, then I must be willing to say I do not believe in the Bible's account of creation. Now to me, that's a bold step and a terrible step. Because if I chose to believe what man says about evolution, about how life began, and not the Bible, then I need to be able to stand up before Christians and say, you know what, I love God, I love the Bible, but I don't believe the Bible's account of Genesis. You know, and don't try to say, well, it was some myth trying to explain this or some theory trying to explain that. Just go ahead and say, I don't believe it. I don't believe it at all. But Dale, there's a problem, though. If a Christian chooses to not believe Genesis 1, 2, and 3, what happens there is an unraveling effect. Because if you take away Genesis 1, you might as well throw out Genesis 2. And if you don't believe Genesis 2, you know Genesis 3, and really Adam and Eve didn't live, and there wasn't the first sin. Well, if there wasn't the first sin, then, and there wasn't the first Adam and Eve, there wasn't a man called Cain and a man called Abel. There was not the first death. At what point do you begin to say, okay, this is true? Even the story of Abraham. How do you know that Abraham lived? They've proven Ur the Chaldees existed, but not a man by the name of Abraham. And we kind of have an illustration there that we'll bring up of a rope. Think about a rope. Whenever you cut a rope, most ropes you kind of burn the ends of them to glue them together, melt them together so they don't unravel. But when you begin to say, I don't believe in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, you start an unraveling effect. I mean, at what point does it stop? Because as a matter of fact, if you can't believe Genesis 1, 2, 3, you might as well throw out all of Genesis, the story of Noah and Abraham. Well, what about the story of Joseph and the children of Israel going down to Egypt? Well, there goes the book of Exodus. And so the more that we begin to unravel our faith, and that's what we're doing, the weaker our faith becomes. And therefore, then we must not be surprised if we choose to walk off into some other direction. We've known people who have begun to dabble with the theory of evolution and thinking that it's okay and God did this and God did that, not through the means of as taught in the Bible. They eventually fell from the faith because they allowed their faith to unravel. Any thoughts?
Well, in most cases, it's not because their faith unraveled, it's because their faith was never really there. They will believe some of the Genesis account, but they might not believe all of it.
But how can they believe? How could they believe some of it if they? And I'm not arguing with you about it. But my question would be: how could someone believe some of Genesis if they throw out the first 3 or 4 or 5 chapters?
Well, it's not a case of throwing out the first 3 to 5 chapters. It's a case of saying that a day was not 24 hours. A day might have been 1,000 years or so. It's a case of saying that Jonah really wasn't in the whale's belly because a man cannot live in the whale's belly for 3 years. What it is denying the power of God in everything that is said in the Bible. And so basically you've got a Christian who is not grounded in the faith because they haven't been taught properly. And we do that a lot. We're guilty of that when we convert people to Christ. We just kind of walk away and accept the fact that they're going to learn.
Well, that's a good point.
Even the Ethiopian eunuch said, "How can I understand unless somebody shows me how or teaches me?" And we need to do a better job of doing that. And if we do that, then we'll have fewer people that look at this and say, "Well, I believe some of evolution and I believe some of the Bible." But what they're doing is living by penknife religion.
Yeah,
And we need to eliminate that penknife religion and have people firm in their standing for God.
Okay. All right. John.
Well, but I think it goes to what you're saying there, John, is that if we do that, if you take some portions of it away, really, why believe any of the rest of it? Is the point. If you can't believe portions of the Bible, how come you can believe other parts of it? And that's really, I think, what you're saying is not so much that people don't do it,
right.
But how do you justify that? And where do you justify the belief beginning and the belief ending? And I believe in this part, but I don't believe in that part, and that must not be right because that can't be so. Where do you truly believe? Where do you truly put your trust and faith in God? What point does that start?
Well, the whole faith that we have is supposed to be founded upon the evidences found within the Scriptures. That's what faith is. It's being thoroughly convicted and persuaded. And and I agree with Dale in that there are some people who will truly pick and choose for whatever reason. But I've known many cases though where when they start getting rid of the basics of creation and Noah's Ark and the Tower of Babel, when they begin to say, well, those were more myth than fables, that really didn't happen, they end up straying in their faith weakens and they begin departing from the fold. Mm-hmm. But I have known some Christians who would go every time the doors open till the day they die, but still say that they believe that a meteor hit the earth with microbes on it, and so.
Oh, a couple comments in the chat room.
Yes.
Alan had put in here, evolution, he believes, is a way to deny God and His power. That way there is no accountability. Makes it easy.
It's a good start. That's the starting point for that. That's right.
Anthony says, right, evolution is the atheist way of explaining His existence. Their mission is to try to kill God.
Well, that's one of the things that we'll point out in our next lesson. That with when you look at the Norse belief and the Chinese belief and others about creation, they all attribute a deity of some type. Atheists do not. There's no deity to attribute the creation to. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's by chance. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go ahead.
Anthony continued with another thought saying theistic evolution is compromise, and that's what we were mentioning there a few moments ago. Trying to straddle the fence between God and man's wisdom. People do not want to be perceived as simple-minded or uneducated, so they compromise.
That's a good point, Anthony. Yeah.
And then David mentioned here, if we are not created by God, then there is no God. And if there is no God, there is no accountability. And there is no accountability, every man can do what is right in his own eyes.
That's
Which
right.
ultimately leads down to many of the atheists' reasoning and logic behind this whole concept. They'd much rather do what's right in their own eyes.
Yeah.
They much rather believe that there is no God, there is no accountability, there's no repercussions for their actions.
Yeah. I really like what Anthony said there, though, because there is the peer pressure to want to fit with the intellectuals, and if you don't know a lot about science, you really can't argue with them. And so here you are stammering, well, I just believe the Bible. Mm-hmm. And they said, but you're what about this, what about this? And so there's the temptation to want to kind of sway with the scholars and
because
adapt.
they're not going to present their points of view as theories, as uneducated guesses. They're going to present them with some supposed hard evidence that they feel like they have, and so it does become, if you're not educated in that field, it can be difficult to refute that, other than to point to the Bible. And if they don't believe in the Bible, then that's kind of a pointless issue.
That's right. That's a very good thought. Yeah.
Which, of course, brings us back to our study today, was not necessarily to defeat the non-Bible believers' viewpoint.
Right. Those are great studies, but there is a lot of information and more well-trained people. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about Christians. I know of Christians who are doctorates, and they can sit down and lay out there for you non-biblical evidence as to why the earth is young, as to why this and why that. They believe in the Bible, but for those who reject the Bible, they can argue with them from the non-biblical evidence, and it's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I think we need to appreciate a little bit more as to why we're even involved in this study.
Sure. Go ahead.
Our school system today is atrocious, and our colleges, for teaching our young people evolution. They eliminate altogether the creation idea.
Mm-hmm.
And our young people are buying into this. And as adults, as Christian adults, it's important that we have a good, firm foundation in being able to sit down with our young people and our young adults and teach them properly the biblical creation, so that their faith is strong, so that they can take a stand in these school systems and these colleges when these professors try to teach this stuff. Even the atheist believes in something.
Right. That's right.
They have a strong belief, and they're trying to push their belief. And it's the atheists who have taken everything out of the school systems. It's the atheists who's taken everything out of our federal government. And yet, when you look at Washington, D.C., every monument you see in Washington, D.C., if you look at the House and the Senate,
Mm-hmm.
and you look at the back where the chairman sits, the Speaker of the House, and the Speaker of the Senate, you look behind them, and the biblical idea is there, but they are constantly trying to ignore it, and they're trying to push this on our young people. And if we allow this to happen, then the church is going to become very, very weak over this, because our young people are going to become more and more deluded in the foundation, the faith of the church.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's, matter of fact, that goes into a comment that Anthony quoted there in the chat room that tells us the very reason why we should do what Dale was talking about, preparation of our children.
Right. Yeah, it talks about here in 1 Corinthians 1, verse 19 and 20. It says, "For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and will bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this world? Hath not God made foolish the wisdom of this world?"
Exactly.
What's interesting is when you go through the Bible, even many, well back into the Old Testament, you see the wisdom of God, and you can go back and find things that scientists have just proven in the last few hundred years or so,
Right.
that were evident in the Scriptures well before that.
Oh, certainly. The fact the earth being round is referred to in the Scriptures. The whole process of evaporation in the rain is referenced in the Scriptures. Just so many different things. You're right. Exactly right. And so I think what we, and just going back to what Dale said there, it is very crucial. Our young people are having to, just like we faced it when we were in school, our young people are facing it every day. And I was real blessed. I had a teacher who, in a 7th grade, I was objecting to what she was saying. She said, "John, I understand what you believe. I believe the same way. This is a science class, and these are theories of man's, and we have to teach them because it's in the curriculum. But understand, I believe in God too, and I think He created the way the Bible said it." I said, "Oh, okay, I'm not alone then." and she said, "But when you're taking courses like this, you need to give the answers that the book's looking for to pass the class." On an unrelated subject, I had a band teacher, or a new band teacher years ago. I had a very strong military man, very strong disciplinarian, and he believed in disciplining children. So when he went through college the first time, he failed the class dealing with how to deal with children and discipline children, because he refused to write down the right answers that the book was looking for. So the next time around, he said, "Okay, I'm going to put down the answers that the book wants, but I don't believe it." And but it's very important. Very important. Okay, any other thoughts before we step into the main section?
Oh, David just mentioned Ben Stein's documentary Expelled shows just how much peer pressure there is in the scientific community to conform to the theory of evolution.
I need to see that movie. I've heard a lot of good things about it. I haven't seen it yet. So, well, let's go ahead and take we're going to do only 2 breaks tonight. So we'll take our last one for this evening, and then we'll run to the end of the study here. That way we can start where we're going to start on the other side of the break. We're going to look at the Bible's account of the beginning of life. There's a lot of information found within the first book of Genesis that's easy to match up with what science has discovered in recent years and how it all began. So we'll take a few minutes, and for the remainder of our time, see how far we get, and then we will continue, of course, next Tuesday night. So stay tuned. On the other side of the break, we will look at what the Bible says about the beginning of life. We will be right back. Summertime is quickly approaching. Many families have already started making plans for their summer vacation. Are you looking for something to do with your family this summer? Perhaps something that is wholesome and spiritually uplifting. If so, then I have a wonderful idea for you and your family. If you live in the Oklahoma City area, we would love for you and your family to be our guest during our 2011 Summer Gospel Meeting. Dan Petty, a faithful gospel preacher from Temple Terrace, Florida, will be presenting the lessons. Our Summer Gospel Meeting will begin Sunday, June 12th, and end Thursday, June 16th. If you will be traveling through our area, then please consider making plans to visit with us as well. As always, we will broadcast the gospel meeting live over the internet. For more information regarding our upcoming gospel meeting, see our website, www.seminolepoint.org. Let's take a few minutes now and let's talk about what the Bible says. I think it was David a while ago who said the simple way.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at that. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with Genesis chapter 1. And Dale, read for us Genesis 1 verse 1. And we're going to spend a few minutes then talking about what can be seen within that verse there.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite scriptures because it talks about baseball.
Yes.
In the beginning.
Yes.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
All right, let's look at the phrase that Dale referenced there in the beginning. Let me show you what God created. And depending on how you look at this, you see the passing of time. Now, let me explain something here. The passing of time is based upon matter. Now, what I mean by that is the way that we measure time is based upon all things physical. Our measurement of time is based upon the rotation of a physical earth upon its axis. It is based upon the movement of the movement of the moon around the earth to generate the months. And then the earth rotating around the sun to create the years. If there was no matter, period, there would be no measurement of time whatsoever. There would be no time. So I like to think that that the beginning of time is seen here when God created all things. When He created the heavens and the earth, we see here the very beginning of time. Now, and we need to think about this because this is very important when we talk about the fact that God created man in His own image. If God created all things physical in the beginning, what existed prior to all things physical? Well, that would have been the spiritual realm. And what it is, we don't know. What it's like, we have no idea. We just have the descriptions of it in the Bible. But prior to the physical universe, there was no physical universe, nothing. It was just simply that which was spiritual. So without the physical universe, there is no time. All there is eternity and the spiritual realm. We have cross-references in the lessons, and we won't take the time to look at. But we know that God is spirit and dwells within heaven, which is the spiritual realm. We know that Jesus is immortal, and He dwells within the spiritual realm. Even the ecclesiastical writer, and Paul in Hebrews tells us that after death, we will return to God. We'll leave this physical universe, and we will step into the spiritual realm. And my point is, though, in the beginning, we see the creation of time. Any thoughts about that?
No, I agree with everything you just said.
Okay. All right.
I often think about time being one of those very difficult concepts to understand and grasp. A lot of things are difficult to really get a full understanding of, and I agree with what you said there as far as time goes, and the reason why it's hard to understand eternity.
Right.
Because since we were born, we've known time. I mean, just, it didn't take long after we were born to start, going to bed at a certain time, getting up at a certain time. Everything on a cycle, eating breakfast at a certain time, lunch and dinner, everything was on time and on schedules. 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, you were on a schedule, you were on time. It was what time, this time, that time, dinner time, supper time, whatever.
Right.
Time it was. And so sometimes it can be, I think it's hard to understand that concept of eternity, but I think the way you pointed out there is a very good idea, is that the reason is because before time existed, before there was anything, there was no need for time.
Right.
There was no need to track time. And so, even though for us it's difficult to understand, it's there. Eternity is there.
It is, yeah. And it's an amazing concept. Like you said, hard to understand. Yeah. But let's look at the next two words, God created. You may look at this as the beginning of energy, pardon me, or the beginning of force. And what I mean by that is the active force of God seen in the creation of all things. Think about the amount of energy that was required, that God expended when He created the heavens and the earth. I mean, we're not talking about playing with us playing with clay. Oh, sorry. Although it is, God creating the heavens and the earth would be as easy to Him as playing with clay with us. But we see there the beginning of energy. The very beginning of what we understand to be energy, I think, came into existence when God exercised His power and created that creating power there. It's just a thought.
Well, think about this. Now, you got two statements here. In the beginning, God created.
Yes.
Now, you think about our solar system. You have the sun sitting in the very center of the solar system.
Okay.
And where's the largest planet to the sun?
Jupiter?
Where is it located, though? Closest to the sun, isn't it?
Sure.
Well, imagine if it was sitting out there where Pluto is, which is no longer a planet according to our science.
Yeah.
But all of these rotate
Yep.
in exact manner around that sun. Now, if Jupiter was sitting way out there at Pluto, the gravity of the sun would not keep it in line.
I'm sorry, Mercury is the closest planet to the sun.
Right.
You said largest, that threw me off there.
I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead there.
But these planets are aligned based on the gravity and everything.
Mhm.
And God has created this thing perfect. And we know exact time that they're going to make a complete circle around the sun. We
That's
can
true.
follow it with our telescopes.
Right.
Same thing with the Earth. We know that it rotates. Now, these planets could have easily just been, the sun could be here and these planets could be sitting out here in order and not rotate at all, because gravity would hold them exactly where they are.
Okay.
God created the universe, though, in such a manner that all of these rotate in an organized manner.
That's right.
And we talk about evolution. How could evolution do something like that?
Yeah, exactly. By mere chance, they say. Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point. John, let's talk about heaven and the earth for a moment. What do we see when the Bible says God created the heavens and the earth? What was that He created? Simply.
Basically created matter.
Yeah.
Beginning of matter there.
Yeah. When we talk about the heavens, we're talking about all of the universe. We can't see to the end of it, even with our Hubble Space Telescope. But essentially, and I kind of like this illustration, essentially the universe is God's Tupperware container that He put all of matter in. I mean, that's it. Everything else is a spiritual realm. And the universe is a temporary, physical existence that will come to an end one day. And we see that when He created the heavens and the earth. Okay.
And it makes you wonder sometimes, as much as we've figured out over the past few hundred years about why things are that we didn't understand before, why certain things exist even, what their purposes are, we've come to have a much better understanding of all these things. People look out in space and I think sometimes wonder, well, what's the purpose of having that star way out in the middle of thousands of light years or however many light years away as it were? What's the purpose of that? And for me, some of those things are not really important to understand the purpose, but I know God has a purpose.
Well, later in this particular lesson, we'll talk about the purpose. And it's too simple. Signs and seasons. Think about that. All the planets out there, pardon me, serve a singular purpose. Travis, mute me for a minute while John talks for a second.
David mentioned in the chat room here that he's heard it said, in the beginning, time, God, or energy, created, force, the heavens, space, and the earth, matter.
I like that explanation. And that's a good way of putting the sum of existence and what God created into that verse.
And I just mentioned that. I mean, some of those stars you can't even see
You're right.
without a telescope. And some of those galaxies you can, have to have a really big telescope to make out. You can't see them just with your naked eye. And
Well,
so,
the Lord knew that one day we'd be making telescopes, so He had to put something out there that we'd see. Maybe not. Okay. Well, John, go ahead and read for us Genesis 1, verse 2. Let's spend a few minutes looking at that one.
Genesis 1, verse 2 says, "The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters."
Now, we'll talk about this later, but those who believe in the gap theory believe that the billions of years fit within this verse right here, between 2 and 3. But I don't see that as being a break, that God did this, okay, and then we go to verse 3. When we look at verse 2, we see that God, when He initially made the earth, it was without design, and it was void of light, and it was void of life. But the thing is, it did not stay this way very long. And the earth wasn't unsupervised. We know that the Spirit of the Lord was present over the earth. Now, what is interesting is we know that the Godhead was present in the beginning. We know God created, and of course Elohim is a plural form, a plural word there. But we see the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, and then we see Jesus, according to John 1, He was present in the beginning, and by Him all things were made that were made, John 1:1 says there. So when we look at the Spirit of God hovering over the face of the earth, we see the Godhead here. We see Elohim. Any thoughts?
Well, this is where, and we have one member of our congregation that has this idea, is God created the stars, but it took millions of years for the light from the stars to get to the earth. And so that's why one day can't be 24 hours.
Yeah.
What we fail to realize, and what this individual fails to accept, is that if God is omnipotent, all-powerful, and God can create the stars, God can create the light from the star to the earth at the same time. It may take billions of years for that light beam to continue, but He's already got it from beginning to end, and it continues to burn, continues to provide that light to us.
That's right. I think about like a painter who paints a picture. God put everything the way He wanted at that moment. Light in transit.
Yep. Yeah, every time we go to like a cave or something like that on a tour or something, and you have the stalactites and stalagmites, it took millions of years for all the calcium deposits to form that. This is the same issue.
Right.
Why is it so hard to believe that if God could create the earth, that He could create it mature? He could create it already with things in existence, such as the stalactites and the stalagmites.
And here's the thing I don't understand. If it takes millions of years to make a stalactite and a stalagmite, and yet I moved into my house, brand new house, and 6 months later I've got all this calcification on my shower head, what happened to the millions of years?
Don't take a shower in Dale's shower. It's got stalactite hanging from the
No, I put a water softener in as soon as I saw that.
Well, but actually they have found, and I'd have to find my resource for it, but they've found caves where they've shown, I don't remember what the year was, like 8-10 years, stalagmites formed of such size that they equaled some that they said was millions of years old. So it's,
Well, they've also found coal, and in their mining process found copper buckets in it. Now, these so-called humans millions of years ago didn't have enough knowledge to make a copper bucket.
Yeah. That's a good point. Okay.
Those are aliens again.
David has an interesting comment there in the chat room, if we want to reference that for a moment.
Sure.
Go ahead there.
Psalms 19, verses 1 through 6, he points out, also tells us the purpose of the created universe.
Let's look at that for a moment. Psalms chapter 19, verses 1 through 6.
Psalms 19, verses 1 through 6 says, "Then Job answered and said, How long will you..."
Hold on.
Oh, I'm in Job. How did I get to Job? No wonder Job answered.
Yeah.
I went from Psalms to Job.
Sorry. I thought, well, let me stop you before you go any further on that one.
So Psalms 19 said, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows His handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them He has set a tabernacle for the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoices like a strong man to run its race. Its rising is from one end of heaven, and its circuit to the other end, and there is nothing hidden from its heat.
Yeah, that's a good passage to reference there in relation to what God has created, what it says to us. You know, the knowledge and the vastness of it there.
Mm-hmm.
So
That kind of goes back to my point a little bit about why did he create all those stars that we can't see with the naked eye, but with the telescope they are very miraculous.
right.
You know, it's amazing to look at some of those little galaxies that are out there in the telescopes that you can get, and like it says here, you know, shows his handiwork, shows his majesty, his power.
That's true. Go along with what David said. David goes on to say, God was able to create a mature universe and earth in a day just as he was able to create a full-grown mature man in one day. Mm-hmm. If we can grasp the concept of a mature Adam, we can also understand the concept of a maturely created universe. Mm-hmm. So it's right there for us to believe. So, well, let's go ahead and look at Genesis verses 3 through 5. And we probably won't get through the end of this particular section before we have to close the study. But Dale, I'm going to have you, if you would, read that, Genesis 1, 3 through 5.
Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day.
All right, let's spend a few minutes on this one, what time we have remaining for our study tonight. Notice the first phrase, then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. I mean, there's no simpler way to put it but this: God made light. We might say that God called forth light, or that he called forth illumination. Now, some people would say, well, it's impossible to have light without some sort of light source. But I'm thinking, if God's able to create the physical universe out of nothing, he can create the light without there being a source for the light. Mm-hmm. I mean, it would not be beyond the realm of his ability to do so. So if we believe in the greatness of God, then we can believe God created illumination before creating the sun and the moon. You know, it's easy enough to believe. Mm-hmm. God did it.
No more harder to believe that the sun creates light.
Yeah.
Why does fire emit light?
That's a good point.
How do you really understand the concept and all? Sure, for the physical, chemical reactions and whatnot, but why does that happen that way? And so you can go all the way back into why. Well, because God made it that way.
That's right. God created the rules that cause that
he created
energy,
the light, and then he also then decided, here's all of the things that will emanate light.
Yeah, that's right. Something to consider, and the benefits of there being illumination prior to a sun is that if there had not been warmth of this light, then life would not have been able to survive upon the earth. I mean, we wouldn't be living today if it wasn't for the light that comes from the sun. The plant life would die. Animals would die. We would eventually die at some point. And you think about even the photosynthesis process within the plants. All of this is made possible because of the light that God created in the beginning. Mm-hmm. So, very much so. All right. Dale, think about the next one there. God divided the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Now, I've often thought this interesting. You think about this. What did God have to do to the earth to create a day and a night?
What did he have to do to the earth?
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have to do anything to the earth. God spoke and it was done.
Yeah, but he spun it. He started it turning.
Well, all right, if you want to turn the earth, yes. But he didn't have to turn the earth at that point.
Well, my point is, point I was making with this is that we know there was no sun at this point, but there was light. And if you got the earth here, and in order for there to be a day and a night, the light has to illuminate one side of the earth, and the other side of the earth has to be dark. But if that was perpetually that way, okay, then one side of the earth would be like the moon, it'd be continually dark. But we see within the night and the day the aspect of the rotation of the earth, that the earth was rotating at this point. Because what would happen then is as the earth is rotating, there would be a continual change. One part of the earth would be day, the other part would be night, and then it would be the evening and the morning as the earth would be rotating there. And it's a brilliant rotation because it keeps a perfect balance in weather. If the earth didn't rotate on its axis, one side would be cooked by the sun and the other side would be frozen. You know, and so when we see although it says that God called the light day and the darkness He called night, there had to have been the rotation of the earth kicked off at that point, if it wasn't already rotating.
That's what I would believe, that when He created it rotating.
Already spinning on its axis.
Right.
Yeah, to me that'd be easy enough to accept.
I mean, because it would be just as easy for Him to decide everything's going to be light, and then everything's going to be dark.
Yeah.
And everything's going to be light. You know, He wouldn't have had to necessarily rotate it to have that happen if He didn't want to.
True. But eventually...
But with the sun, right.
Yeah, knowing what was going to...
Physical principles. Right.
Yeah. So then, with that in place, then, we have, as he concludes that verse, the evening and the morning, showing the completion of of a day there, though. The evening and the morning were the first day. And to me, it would seem... It would not even seem figurative for Moses to describe a millions of year process as evening and the morning were the first day. Mm-hmm. You know, because at that time period, the way that Moses understood this, they recollected a day as starting in the evening and ending after the next morning there, and evening to evening there. And so when God said this was a day, it was evening and the morning. This was the first day. I mean, what else can you take this other than 24 hours? If you cannot take this literal, then you cannot take any of Genesis 1 literally. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem I have with saying that, well, evening and the day was 1,000 years. Well, as soon as you say that, you immediately say all of Genesis 1 is figurative. Mm-hmm. And then Genesis 2 is figurative.
And later on, when we see the sun and the stars and the moon come into existence, and we have the physical principles of day and night being what we see now,
right,
also being called a day,
right,
with no differentiation between the day and night, or the light and the darkness here being a day, and the light and the darkness with the sun and the moon being a day. How do we come up with this idea that they must be different? Well, this day must have been millions of years, and that day now is just 24 hours because it was a rotation. Because if not, if that day was longer than 24 hours and millions of years, then, as you said, one side would be a crisp, the other side would be an iceberg, and then a day later we would swap out, and for the next million years, one side would be a crisp and the other side would be an iceberg.
How do you know what's figurative and what's literal if you're going to randomly, like I say, and this is completely unrelated, but Jehovah's Witnesses believe that the 144,000 will dwell in heaven, and everybody else will be on this earth physically. Well, the two passages from Revelation where they pull the number, they take the literal number, 144,000, but they don't take the literal description of them being virgin men, Jewish men at that. So they take one part literal and then they say the other one's figurative. And if we do this with Genesis, we're no different in effect. Anyway, that's kind of why I see that. Others may disagree with that.
You could always ask, well, why didn't He create the sun and the moon on the first day? And sometimes it brings you back to this concept of faith to me.
Well, sure.
It might have been a little bit easier for everybody to go along with a day being a day if the sun and the moon were there on the first day.
Yeah.
And the lights and so the rotation was creating this day and night concept. And okay, so now it's easy to understand and believe this day and night.
Well,
but sometimes to me there's things that are in there that He allows us to believe a lie if we want to believe a lie. And if we search hard enough, sometimes we'll find it.
Right.
And this may be one of those cases to me where maybe that could be one of the reasons why He decided to do one thing first versus another thing first.
Well, when you look at Moses' explanation, the light was created on day 1. That which emitted the light came on day 4. Mm-hmm. The atmosphere and the dry land that came forth on day 2 gave place for life that we see on day 5. And or not dry land, but the firmament. Mm-hmm. And then when we see the dry land coming forth, we then see life on day 6. So it's an interesting relationship: 1 to 4, 2 to 5, and 3 to 6 in the preparation process. Mm-hmm. But I've often thought that if I was going to say I believe in the power of God, but I was going to reject Genesis and Genesis account, then to me it'd be more logical to say that in the beginning God spoke, and instantly everything was in place. Mm-hmm. Light, sun, moon, stars, plant, animal, and Adam. And then, so that we could better understand it, He gave it to Moses the way that he did, breaking it down so we could better comprehend the creation. To me, if you're not going to believe what it says, then let's give God more credit and say that he spoke it and immediately came into effect, instead of saying, well, God spoke it and then 4 billion years later he got around to making man. I mean, just, but to me, just accept what the Bible says and be happy with life. And, to me, that's the best option right there. Well, we've come to the end of our time tonight. We'll have to continue this next week. We'll start with verse 6. That was up to day 1 there. Gentlemen, any final thoughts?
Well, one final thought. If you'll notice, after each day, he said the evening and the morning.
Yes.
He never said the morning and the evening. This shows the wisdom of God, because if he said the morning and the evening, then we'd get into the debate of how long was a day? Was it just 12 hours? Because we see our days today. We wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning. We go to bed at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. That makes a day. But he didn't do that. He said the evening and the morning. So now we have to look at a full 24 hours.
That's true. That's true. I think also consider too, when Moses was writing this inspiration, that's the way they recollected the day, evening and morning. Yeah. John.
Well, David, just point out one thing here about light. He says it's simply a name for a range of electromagnetic radiation that can be detected by the human eye. In the purest sense, God created a full spectrum of electromagnetic radiation. Maybe the fact that God is light can be understood in a more literal sense as well as in a spiritual way. Who knows?
Yeah, I wanted to say that earlier. I just couldn't remember those words.
David, you're getting too technical for us.
Way deep.
But actually, he's exactly right, though.
He is.
It is simply a series of waveforms. I mean, it's certain wavelengths, some that we can detect, some we cannot detect. So he's exactly right about that. It's not some magical, here's a spark, look at the light, where did it, it's been very scientific. Yeah. That's exactly right. Any other thoughts, John?
Nope.
Okay. Well, let me encourage you to do this. First off, thank you so much for joining us. Let me say that to you. It's always a great pleasure to us to have you to join us for these studies there. If you've missed any portion of this study, or if you've missed any of our studies, you can find them all at scripturalway.org and click on previous broadcasts. Once the website's updated, the previous broadcast button takes you to the most recent one, and then you'll see a link up to the right of the viewing window where you can go to past Bible studies, and choose them from there. But let me encourage you as you go through this week, always remember, let's put the Bible first above everything, especially what man says. And if the Bible says it, then that's the end of the study. I mean, that settles it within our mindset. And that should be our attitude. Don't allow ourselves to be confused by what man has to say in man's theories. Let us believe what the Lord God has to say. Because in the end, theories are no more than beliefs. They are not based upon facts, but they must be accepted by faith. So listen to what the Word of God has to say. Thank you very much for joining us. I want to remind you again of our gospel meeting that's coming up in June 12th through the 16th with Dan Petty of Temple Terrace, Florida. We'd love to have you, if you're in the Oklahoma City area, to come visit us for the week of that gospel meeting or any time that we meet. And information about our other meeting times can be found at SeminolePointe.org. Thank you very much for joining us. And Lord willing, we will meet back here again next Tuesday night at 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time at scripturalway.org.